Back when I was 13, I had this paper route gig, pretty old school stuff. Every morning around 6 a.m., I'd be out there, satchel in hand, dropping off the daily paper to houses in my neighborhood. It was simple, just what you'd expect from a paper route. Rain or shine, I was out there. Didn't matter if it was pouring, sunny, or even in the middle of a blizzard. Those papers had to be delivered. Looking back, I guess that's why they hired kids like me. We kids were easy to convince to go out in any weather, and walking the route was just part of the deal. So, this one winter morning, still dark outside, I'm doing my rounds. These were my favorite shifts, honestly. The world felt like it hadn't woken up yet. Houses looked cozy, chimneys puffing out smoke. Kind of nostalgic, maybe, because of the winter holiday vibes. I'm walking through the darkness, right? The few streetlights are casting these dim yellow glows on the snow. Everything's extra still, almost kind of ominous. I'd stop between houses, not just to catch my breath, but to look around. Something felt off, but I couldn't pin it down. All I knew was I had to keep going. Finish the route, despite the cold. After passing this house at the end of a cul-de-sac, I hear these sounds. 2 loud pops, then a third a minute later. I grew up around guns, so I recognized the sound, but I brushed it off. Thought maybe it was a car backfiring, like I'd seen with my dad's truck before. Seemed more likely to be a possibility than gunshots. I didn't mention it to anyone until later that morning. You know how it is? You don't want to bring up something when you're not sure what it was. When I finally told my parents, they said it was probably just a car. That put me at ease, confirmed what I wanted to believe. But later that day, man, the neighborhood was crawling with cops and news vans, all around that house near the cul-de-sac. My folks told me to stay inside, but I wouldn't have gone out to talk to the cops anyway. Telling my parents about the sounds I heard, it felt wrong, almost disrespectful. The thought that one of our neighbors might be dead, that was too much. It hit me then, being the paper boy who knew something first. Maybe that's why I hesitated to speak up, talking about people I didn't know, feeling this deep sadness. It was heavy. That whole experience, it left me with this quiet, suffocating feeling that stuck with me. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that morning, those sounds I thought were car backfires, they hung around like a shadow. Every time I passed that house at the end of the cul-de-sac, I'd get this chill, like I needed to get away fast. I remember this one morning, super cold, sky all pale and gray. My breath's making these little clouds as I walk. The neighborhood's silent, like it's under some spell, and it's making me uneasy. My satchel's heavy with papers, feeling more like a burden than usual. Getting close to the cul-de-sac, I'm feeling this sense of dread. The house at the end, it's looking ominous, shadows all weird in the morning light. I drop the paper on the doorstep, then I see a weird-looking face in the window. Looks like a woman, her expression strange and pale. I look away fast, feeling like I'm intruding. I hurried back, putting some distance between me and that house. I tried to glance back at the window, but the woman was gone. Just as I started to shake off the feeling, something caught my eye. There she was again, standing and just watching me. Her eyes were pale, almost white, and she looked at me like she knew me, like she'd been watching me for a while. Then, out of nowhere, she said, "Alex, my boy, it's all okay. You heard those sounds and called the cops. We understand." I responded, my voice shaky. "You know me? What do you mean by we?" Then I saw it. From the windows of the house, more people were staring at me. I didn't hesitate. I dropped all my papers and ran. The woman almost caught me, but I was too fast. As I ran, I glanced back and saw no one anymore. It took me about 10 minutes to get home, and I told my parents everything. They called the cops, explaining the whole situation. The officer said they'd send someone to check on the woman in our house. But as we talked, I started to get these looks from them, like they thought I was just some attention-seeking kid making stuff up. My parents were furious, but thankfully, they believed me. Now, 12 years later, I often think about that experience. Who were all those people? Where were they when the police came? And what was that woman planning to do? I've come up with some ideas, but not a single one is positive. And were there really gunshots, or was there something more sinister at play? It's something that stayed with me, a mystery that never really got solved. So, this happened when I was 15, right near Algonquin Park. My dad and I were heading up to our cottage in the dead of winter. I've always been in awe of that park, you know. Grew up spending every summer there, soaking in the beauty. Our cottage was on this huge lake, a good 30-minute drive from the nearest town. During summers, the place was buzzing. The lake and the town's population would triple, easy. It was the classic cottage country scene. People chilling by the lake, nights around campfires, the whole deal. I have these awesome memories of sunny days, laughter, and motorboats zipping around the lake. But winters? Totally different vibe. Most folks who didn't live there year-round would head back to the city, leaving the area kinda deserted. Just a few locals and the random person popping up every now and then. The pine trees, all covered in snow, made the forest super quiet. Our cottage was on this dead-end road with about 20 other cottages. Ours was smack in the middle, neighbors too far to see through the trees. Dad needed to do some painting at the cottage. Mom had been on his case about it. It was the end of February, long weekend. I tagged along, figuring it'd be cool to spend some quality time with him. It's usually a 5-hour drive, but man, with the heavy snow, it turned into 8. Got dark early too. We're driving through the park around midnight, and it's just dead quiet, pitch black except for our headlights. Finally, we're out of the park, with just half an hour to the cottage. The snow had stopped, and we were both pretty eager to get there. But the road to our place hadn't been plowed yet. Dad's cursing under his breath, his frustration palpable in the cold air. The snow was thick and our car struggled a bit as we made our way. Then, we noticed these fresh tire tracks. "The Smiths must be up for the weekend," Dad says as we follow the tracks around a bend. It was odd considering how secluded and quiet the area usually was during winter. There's this white van parked off to the side, almost hidden by the snow-covered trees. "What the?" Dad mutters as we drive past. The van looked out of place, its windows fogged up, and it seemed like it had been there for a while. I glance back and see 2 figures in the front seat, lit up by our taillights. They seem to be just sitting there, motionless. I tell Dad and he's like, "Maybe they're lost." But I'm thinking, why park there on a dead-end road? It didn't make any sense and a chill ran down my spine. We get to our place, start unloading, but I can't shake this weird feeling about the van. It spooked me so much I begged Dad to let me sleep upstairs with him. While we were unloading, it started to snow again, this time heavier, accompanied by a strong wind. The room I usually shared with my sister had these big windows with no blinds, looking out into the dark forest. And I'm already scared of the dark, right? The thought of being alone downstairs, with only glass separating me from the outside, was too much to bear. As my dad got ready for bed, I sat in the living room reading a book, just a small lamp on. It's so quiet. I can hear the ringing in my ears, and then I get this feeling like someone's watching me. The living room windows, no curtains, just this view of the lake and a couple of lights from cottages across the way. I try to focus on my book, but the feeling of being watched grows stronger. I turn off the lamp, and now the moon's lighting up the snow outside. It's beautiful. I walk over to the window, trying to enjoy the serene view to calm my nerves. That's when I see them. 2 figures by the back porch, just barely hidden. My heart drops. They're standing there, almost blending into the shadows. As I'm about to head upstairs to wake Dad, I hear it. A faint knock on the window. It's so soft, I almost convince myself it's just the wind. But then, there's a rattle on the doorknob. I freeze, every muscle in my body tensing. The silence that follows is suffocating. I strain my ears, and that's when I hear it. A weird, rhythmic clicking sound. Like someone trying to pick a lock. My mind races with panic. I'm torn between running to my dad and hiding. The clicking continues, persistent, eerie. It's like the sound is getting into my head, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I gather every ounce of courage I have and start to move towards the stairs. My steps hesitant. As I reach the bottom of the staircase, the clicking stops abruptly. The silence is almost worse, filled with anticipation. I bolt up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. Reaching Dad's room, I wake him up, my voice barely a whisper. By the time he checks, the figures are gone. But the footprints are there, leading from the front of the cottage, then back down the driveway. I'm freaking out, begging Dad not to go outside. He checks the locks, turns on the porch lights, and sets the alarm. I'm lying there all night, scared I'll see someone staring back at me through the window. Every little sound makes me jump. I keep imagining those figures, wondering who they were, what they wanted. Next morning, Dad confirms the footprints and tire marks. Looks like they were planning to break in, saw our tracks, knew we were there. Dad calls it in, and turns out there have been break-ins in the area. But why target a house with people inside? To this day, I still wonder about it. What were they after? Why our cottage? It's one of those things that just sticks with you, you know? The quiet of the winter forest, the isolation, and those mysterious figures in the night. The faint knocking, the rattle on the doorknob, and that eerie clicking sound. They haunt me, a chilling reminder of that winter night. The unsettling events of this story began a couple of years ago, following the death of my husband's father. At that time, my husband was working night shifts as a security guard, a job he found quite displeasing. We were living in a small, cramped apartment, the rent of which was a constant strain on our finances. Life was tough, but a significant change was on the horizon after his father's passing. When my husband inherited a substantial amount from his father's estate, it marked the beginning of a new chapter in our lives. After the initial period of mourning had passed, we made the decision to sell his father's house. The sale brought in a considerable sum of money, which we used to purchase a barn that had been converted into a house in Ohio. The location was ideal, not too far from cities or towns, which allowed my husband to continue his night shifts. Despite our improved financial situation, he was plagued with worries about depleting our funds, so he kept his job. This routine left me alone in our barn house, situated in a remote area with no streetlights or nearby neighbors. The isolation of the house was palpable, and the nights were filled with an eerie silence, occasionally broken by the sounds of nature. Our dog Benzo, a friendly golden retriever, was my only companion during those long nights. He would sleep at the foot of our bed, but I noticed that he too seemed uneasy. He would often wake up abruptly, his ears perked up as if he heard something unusual. The barn house, with its rustic charm, had 2 levels, the ground floor and an upper floor. The previous owners had converted it from a barn to a residential property, presumably to make a profit from the land. The price was reasonable, and the house had a quaint appeal to it. Initially, the house seemed like a dream come true, but as the evenings drew in, a sense of dread would settle over me. I would often stay awake until the early hours of the morning, waiting anxiously for the sound of my husband's car on the gravel driveway, or the sight of his headlights shining through the windows. The gravel outside the house was peculiarly loud, amplifying every footstep and creating an echo that resonated through the still night air. The staircase in our house added to the eerie atmosphere. It was made of old wood, possibly oak, and it creaked loudly with every step. The sound was so distinct that it often seemed as if someone was walking up the stairs when I was alone. On most nights, I felt a strange presence in the house, as if my husband was still there with me, even though he was miles away at work. Despite my efforts to stay awake until his return, exhaustion would eventually take over. However, my mind would resist sleep, keeping me alert until the early hours of the morning. Benzo, too, seemed restless and would only settle down once my husband returned home. One particular night stands out in my memory, a night that was more terrifying than any other. I was awakened by strange noises outside the house. Seeing car lights in the driveway, I initially thought it was my husband returning home. But as I prepared to make room for him in bed, a sudden realization struck me. something was amiss. The car's headlights were still on and the engine was running. I thought perhaps my husband was on a call or sending a text, but Benzo's behavior quickly dispelled that notion. He was growling, his tail stiff, a clear sign that he sensed danger. Panic began to set in. My fingertips tingled with numbness and my heart raced with fear. Benzo's anxiety only heightened my own. I cautiously got out of bed and approached the window, peering out through a small gap in the curtains. What I saw filled me with dread. It was a car, but not my husband's. The headlights illuminated the area around the car, and I could see two men standing outside, their car doors open. They were shining flashlights around the lower part of the barn. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the gravity of the situation. The men were strangers, and their presence on our property at such a late hour was deeply unsettling. Seconds felt like hours as I stood there, frozen with fear. Suddenly, the men pointed their flashlights directly at my face. I gasped and quickly retreated, letting the curtain fall back into place. The sound of their car doors slamming shut echoed in my ears. Lying on the cold bedroom floor, I was consumed by terror, certain that they were about to break into the house and harm me. Then, to my immense relief, I heard the sound of the car backing out of the driveway. The gravel crunched and vibrated under the weight of the vehicle as it retreated. Gathering all the courage I had, I peeked out the window again. The car was reversing onto the main road and soon disappeared from view. As the car merged onto the main road and vanished into the night, a chilling realization hit me. They were probably thieves, scoping out the house for a break-in. Alone and vulnerable, I quickly secured every door and window, my heart pounding with the stark reminder of how quickly safety can be shattered. That night, with its lurking shadows and unseen threats, still haunts me. A constant reminder of the fragility of safety